to our reader for this evening, John Daniel. Before I do that, I just want to thank a couple of people, in particular Linda Vacura, who has helped us coordinate the reading, and Penny Bossart, who did a wonderful poster for John. John comes to us tonight from Portland, Oregon, and in the case of someone you know, I think there's always a temptation to try and wax eloquent. Those of you who know me know that won't happen tonight. I do want to mention just a couple of things about John. For example, last week we received a book in the mail called Celebrating Peace, in which there is a poem by John Daniel. I believe it's called Of Earth. Notre Dame University Press just published this book, and it has a concluding essay by a poet I very much respect named Denise Lervitoff. And Denise does, in fact, wax eloquent about John's work, and I just want to show you the book. It was our great privilege, those of us who were at Confluence Press a couple of years ago, to come across a manuscript that we very much liked. I think Gary James was there, Bob Johnson was there, a number of people were there, and to have the privilege of looking at it for a rather lengthy and extended period of time, and then trying to find the money to publish it. And the title of that book is Common Ground. Jack Sullivan has been good enough to bring some copies. Unfortunately, there are no cloth copies left in existence. If someone has one, I'd really like to buy it. But it's a book we published with a lot of pleasure. I'm just going to read a couple of things about John from a news release prepared by one of our interns, Jan Donnelly. And I also want to tell you a little secret. I guess it's not a secret, but something that struck me as very curious about John. John has an M.A. from Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. However, John has no B.A. from any other institution whatsoever. And I'm very intrigued, I guess is the word, by how you can do that. And I know some undergraduates who really are intrigued by that idea and would really like to talk to you, John. John grew up around Washington, D.C. and moved to the Northwest in the late 1960s to attend Reed College. He's worked as a logger, a railroader, and a rock climbing instructor. And for several years he worked and lived on a ranch in Oregon near Klamath Falls. In 1982 he received a Wallace Stegner Fellowship in Poetry at Stanford University, where he taught creative writing for 5 years as a Jones lecturer. He now teaches part-time with the Northwest Writing Institute and works at Conant & Conant Booksellers in Portland. This spring, however, I will just interject here, he will be the writer-in-residence at University in Tennessee. He's the poetry editor of Wilderness Magazine and has contributed poems, essays, and articles to magazines like the North American Review, Orion Nature Quarterly, Poetry, the Southern Review, and Wilderness. John's book of essays was accepted for publication by North Point Press, and his reading tonight is sponsored by the LCSC Visiting Writers Series, which is made possible, as some of you probably know, by an institutional development grant. It's also co-sponsored by the Idaho Commission on the Arts, the Division of Languages and Literature, and Confluence Press. Let me introduce, with great pleasure, John Daniel.
Thank you. This is my first reading in the state of Idaho, and I'm glad that it's here at Lewis Clark. Let's see if this is going to hold the water. I'll just reach for it. I want to thank the college, the Visiting Writers Program, and especially Mary Blue for inviting me and for providing for all the generous arrangements. I got a bunch of things to read tonight. I'll use about an hour, but not more than an hour. I thought I'd read a few poems from the book. I'd also like to read an essay from the book of essays to be, and finish with a few new poems from a book of poems to be. And then throughout, I'm going to scatter 3 pieces of an essay in progress, an essay called Desert Notebook, a long essay built of small pieces. So without further ado, I've never been too comfortable with Genesis, and in particular maybe Genesis 2:18-20, when the beasts of the field and fowl of the air are led before Adam so that Adam might name them, thus signifying supposedly his dominion over them. I've always thought that was kind of a slanted story. So I decided to write my own version of that story from a different point of view, also slanted. This is called Naming the New One. They came from mountains and plains to see the new one, the smooth skin, who stood on shaking hind legs and stared, his eyes struck with light. He'll sleep cold, Bear grunted and walked away. Bigfoot was already gone, scared, and Hummingbird had things to do. As the others walked and crawled and flew by, the new one pointed and hurled a sound at each of them, louder and louder in his harsh joy. Those paws are no good, said Gopher. Call him Wildmouth, said Deer. Does he have ears? He'll learn a song, maybe, said Owl. Long after the new one stumbled away, they heard him crashing the brush, still trailing his strange calls. Doesn't see where he's going, Cougar said. Well, said Coyote, we'll always know when he's coming. Coyote acted brave, but he was nervous. Let's watch him for a while. There's plenty of room. When he finds his place, then we'll name him. Still waiting, I guess. Well, it's not November any longer, but I have a poem with November in the title, so it's close, and I'll read it. On the ranch that Jim mentioned in Eastern Oregon, where I lived for several years, and really where I began to write, I had an elm tree right outside my window. Spent a long time staring at it because, as you know, writers spend more time staring out the window than actually writing. And fall's always been my favorite time of year anyway. This short poem is called The Elm in November. The slow labor of summer is finished, the yellow weight delivered to ground. Twigs jittering, buoyant with wind, the elm comes round once more to the grace of emptiness. It enters the cold unburdened, its life withdrawn inside the solitude of its dark limbs, exact pattern against gray sky, the spare shape of enough. We found an injured owl once while I was living on the ranch, badly injured, a wing that was just hanging, and did the only thing we could think of to do. It's probably the wrong thing, I guess. We put him in a shed for his own protection and brought him stew meat and mice and whatever we could think of to see if he would eat. I have a poem that's the story of that owl. The Great Horned Owl. He holds his hurt like a fresh kill, dares me to take it. With a child's triumph, I grip the talons that know only gripping, his hooked beak slashing at my leather gloves, ragged bone jutting from the limp left wing. In his shed, he listens to the barnyard hens he used to terrify. When I open the door, he blinks in the flashlight glare and seizes me in his great yellow eyes. Alone with the dark, he stirs my gift of cold mice. He does not eat. He was the shadow against the stars, the blur at the edge of my headlights, the ghost who discarded headless sparrows in the dust outside my gate, the voice that called in the pines when nothing else spoke. 4 days of death are all he can bear. I find him raking his claws in the heavy dirt that will not let him go. In the morning, specks of straw are stuck to his eyes. He hangs in my hand like nothing, a husk, as if all he was had been life itself. Long after dark, with only coyotes awake, I hear his voice. Beneath Orion, barefoot in the dry grass, I raise my arms in the cold south wind, close my eyes, and almost fly. I didn't get married till I was 35. And I had an aunt. Actually, I had 6 aunts. My father had 6 sisters. I come from a family of tall, strong women. One of my aunts was always on my case about getting married. You know, she was never married herself, and so she really wanted me to get married in the worst way. And in her letters and on the occasions when I saw her back in Springfield, Missouri, she would be wanting to know why I wasn't married yet. And I eventually found a way to answer her that involved a family story that involved her as a girl. So it was great ammunition. Hence the title of this poem, Why I Listen to Family Stories. When Aunt Frances sits up tall in her chair and her eyes loom dark and huge in her lenses, and she announces it's time I got married, remember your Uncle Tell, I say, and Frances laughs like a girl. Because Tell Daniel made the best harness in Missouri, but never learned to drive his own Model T. So Frances, 6 feet of schoolgirl, steered it to his shop on the square one steamy August evening to bring Tell home for dinner. And Tell, a gentleman who smelled of cool leather, said Frances should turn right instead of left. Or left instead of right, she isn't sure now, but she's goddamned sure how she turned on Tell with all 6 feet full of scorn. You don't need a brain to be a Daniel, only a good pair of ears, 'cause there's always another Daniel around to tell you what to do. And there is. Back in 1979, I got my first job as a poet in the schools out in the rural reaches of eastern Oregon, a place called Christmas Valley. You know Christmas Valley? Do you? Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's pretty wonderful, pretty wild, pretty bleak in some ways, pretty wonderful country. It was named, I understood, at the time by Peter Skeen Ogden, who came through about 1829 around Christmas time and named the place Christmas Valley. And that landscape really worked on me. It was spent, you know, a lot of weeks there trying to get kids to write and then walking around the winter desert after school. December in the Oregon desert. Lucky thing Peter Skeen Ogden had a man along to count the days and remember Christmas when it came to pass. Scripture words, the warmth and mind of eastern hearths. A man could backslide tramping these flats where only the scab rocks haven't found cover, the heathen storms haranguing, digging nails into your faith. This space could wear out eyes and ears and leave you wandering wild as sage, your pale skin cured red, reading signs in antelope bones, following a prophet tumbleweed over snow and snow to some bare-fisted peak where you shiver in the spell of a scatter of stars, one bright as the next, as coyotes howl in the continental dark. And the quiet floods back, stars and snow, and that faint word of wind borne over and over, in which everything here has a place except you. I knew I was lucky back in September of 1986 when the phone rang and a voice I didn't know spoke to me as if it knew me. John Daniel, when do you want your book to come out? Turns out it couldn't come out for 2 years, but he told me that, and he was a man of his word, and it came out in 2 years to the month from that phone call. Those were the words I'd been waiting to hear as I had sent the manuscript around to various competitions and publishers for 5 years, working on it all the time, and had come very close on a few occasions, but no one had ever lifted the phone and spoken the magic words. So I knew I was lucky. I didn't know then really how lucky I was, I think. I didn't know that I was forming a relationship not merely with a publisher, but with an enthusiastic advocate of my work, an ally, and a good friend. I'm very grateful to Jim Hepworth and to Confluence Press and to Tanya Gonzalez, who designed a very beautiful book. Let me read one more from here. This is a poem in, I think, 8 parts. Is that right? 8 short parts. Another poem that came from my time on the ranch, where I was introduced, among other things, to some work with cows, including pulling a calf, which is all new to me. This is a story of a difficult calf. A calf for Karen Hamilton. The people named to this poem are kids of the family who owned the ranch, where I was just a renter and kind of informal uncle to the children. 1. Quiet with the pain of her choked womb, the heifer stands stiff-legged. The boys watch as their father breaks her water, reaches in. The milky-tongued head slides stubbornly out, but the shoulders catch. He chains the forelegs, and all of us pull, feet braced on posts, straining flat with the ground as the heifer humps her back and groans. In a liquid rush, the calf comes free, slaps the cold April mud. 2. He shivers on his side, a big black and white. The legs that won't lift him to suck stir feebly on straw. His mother, tongues and tongues, his sopped fur dry. 3. On the bathroom floor, he strives at the bottle, dies down into troubled rest. We hear his nasal bleats all night, the weightless skitter of hooves. What's wrong with him? Jeff asks at breakfast, and we can't say. Strangled too long, half-born, maybe, or flawed from the seed. When we lift him, the legs hang like ropes. 4. 3 days he lolls in his heat lamp womb as we bring bottles and encouraging words. Give up, we don't say. If you could live, you would have walked. You were steaks and soup bones anyway. We study his black and white splotches like a map we don't know how to read. 5. An earlier calf, even bigger, we could only deliver in bloody pieces, but that was a finish. This gloom goes on, the young safely born but broken inside his clean colors. The forehead curls are fluffy and thick, the pink hooves hardened gray. 6. He seizes the nipple. He sucks with such yearning violence, Nathan grips the bottle with both hands. Then he's gone again, slumped on his side, staring after something too far to see. In the quiet each morning we come for his corpse, but he will not die, he will not live. His mother lows at the pasture fence. 7. The boys are yelling on their knees. The calf's forelegs buckle, but he stays half up. They lift him again, and skidding on the slick floor tiles, he stands, takes 1 step on shaky legs too long for him, steps again, and flops on his face. 8. Steady in the grass, he takes the tit, stub tail twitching, then follows her across the windy field toward the others, where they lie and stand. He stops, looks to one side with lowered head, square rump high, then bolts to catch up, something old and sure in his legs, something that knows the ground by heart. I'm going to read now the one section from this desert essay. The essay, when it's done, will be a pastiche, montage, something, drawing on all the trips I've made to the desert, mainly to the canyon country of southern Utah. When I started going there, I knew I would keep going there a long time. There's no titles to these sections. They'll just be separated by asterisks or something in the essay. This one will come from somewhere near the beginning. The bleaters start first, well before sundown, their puffed up pouches rippling the still pools as they sporadically call back and forth like nothing so much as maaing sheep. As twilight deepens, more join in. They all bleat more intensely. A different voice pops up at dusk, staccato nasal quacks start beating out a bebop rhythm to the pulsing chorus of bleaters. And then, when dark is nearly full, the wailers set in. They loose from their 2-inch bodies shriller screams than any sufferer in hell could possibly give forth, ceaselessly, screaming out the remnants of their souls until they must implode with nothing left inside them and screaming more. And so the raucous symphony, obligato of the baritone bleaters, quackers keeping erratic time, and shrilling continuously above that din the banshee wailing of the maniac sopranos. To be assaulted by this noise, we drive hundreds of miles every spring. The noises of frog love, though our flashlights reveal to our voyeuristic eyes little coupling amid all those decibels. The noises of the want of love. And, as a poet, I can't ignore this possibility, they may do it because they love their own voices. If a frog can love this racket, bless him, bless her. They don't have long, and so they give forth mightily. If the pool dries, they do too. They die down to the silence of their crusted eggs in sand. Only the rain can coax them into song again. Did I say song? There's nothing songful in this mess of noise. I'd have a better chance of sleeping to my stepson's heavy metal. But everything around here hearkens to it. Everything comes this way. The deer step down silently. Maidenhair ferns float by air. Bruce and I came clattering over miles of dry stones and sand. We're glad we didn't miss these frogs. It's music we can live with. I'll read a complete essay now from a different landscape. This is from the hills behind Stanford University, where my wife and I lived for 5 or 6 years in a little being 3 rooms and 470 square feet cottage that fronted on oak trees, and behind it was probably the last undeveloped lot in Los Altos Hills, California. The characters, this essay is about a cottage mate who stayed with us for a while. The characters are me, my wife Marilyn, the cottage mate, and briefly at the end, our landlord Wally makes an appearance. Pack rat. It began with faint, slow stirrings above the dinner table where I sat writing. The sounds were soft as pencil rub, so scarcely audible they seemed born in my mind, some obscure rhythm of thought, an idea faintly scratching its way to awareness. Then it ran. It skittered loud across the ceiling tiles toward the kitchen, and I knew we had a rat. In the 2-room shack on an Oregon ranch where I used to live, I'd had a whole succession of rats. There was almost always one of them in residence with me, rambling down to the kitchen at night to gnaw at a pear or rip a loaf of bread to a scatter of shreds on the counter, then scampering around in the attic on rat business while I tried to sleep. My neighbors across the road had the answer. A live trap, an oblong wooden box with a drop door held up by a network of sticks. The rat goes in for the bait, brushes the trigger stick, the door falls, and he's a trapped rat. It was pack rats I was dealing with, so the baiting was easy. Anything would do, a bottle cap, a matchbook, a wad of foil. I caught one rat with 2 nickels and a quarter from my pocket. Cheese or bread would have worked too, of course, but I liked the cleanliness of using non-food items. It was purely a business operation, the poor rodent done in not by bodily need, but by his own sheer covetousness. When I caught a rat, I'd stick the trap in the back of my pickup, drive 5 miles up to Gerber Reservoir, and turn him loose. It was a fair shake, I think. Plenty of wild country up there where a wild rat ought to be able to live, but also, in the summer, plenty of fishermen camping in their motorhomes. The fishermen who drove ceaselessly past my shack as weekends rolled around. If the rat needed human company, they could provide it. As soon as I got rid of one, of course, some kind of vacancy sign went up and another one moved in. I'd never had a close look at a pack rat, so the first one I trapped I wanted to see. I placed the trap mouth to mouth with a wire mesh cage, then tilted them together and shook him from one jail into the other. He sprang from side to side of the cage like a gymnast gone wild, frenzied, no doubt, by the blinding daylight he'd never been so lost in before. I was surprised how unrepulsive he looked. His black eyes bulged comically. The tail, nearly as long as his body, wasn't bare, but furred with brown hair. His belly was white, and so were his feet. All in all, a pretty good-looking animal. He settled down when I draped my jacket over the cage, and when I turned him loose at Gerber, he legged it straight to a rotting log and disappeared. So I knew about rats, and next trip north to visit the ranch, I borrowed the wooden box trap and brought it home. This rat wasn't getting into our kitchen, not into the cottage at all, but he was running around in the walls and ceiling enough to bother us at night, and occasionally he'd settle down to a long bout of gnawing, as if he were boring through the walls to join us, or chewing the electrical wires, as Marilyn imagined. It sounded like his passage to the world was in the kitchen area, so I set the trap in the crawl space underneath. In the morning, the drop door was down. I lay with the flashlight and carefully cracked it. Nothing inside but the slice of bread and tea strainer I'd used for bait. Then, as I started to reset the thing, I saw what I was up against. Oregon ranch rats were one thing. This Bay Area breed, it seemed, was something else entirely. 3 notched sticks fit together to suspend the trap door, and one of them was gone. The smartass had not only sprung the trap from outside, he had left it inoperable. I split a thin piece from a pine board and set to whittling, thinking of the first, until now, smartest rat to have entered my life. Uncle Tom's home was a cabin on the Blue Ridge of Virginia that my parents bought as a weekend place around 1960. The cabin's hand-hewn beams went back to the early 1800s, and as far as anybody knew, Uncle Tom did too. He was a bare-tailed rat, I think, and big, though any rat would have seemed big to me then. He kept a dignified distance, mainly, unless we left some food in the kitchen he couldn't resist. My mother thought he was fine. It was his place more than ours, she said. We were just weekenders. But my father didn't like the idea of a rat in the place, so he set out to kill Uncle Tom. One weekend, he brought rat-sized mouse traps, powerful enough to break a neck. He baited them with cheese and found them undisturbed on Saturday morning and Sunday morning and next weekend when we returned. And so, to my mother's disgust, he bought poison, the kind in those little cardboard boxes you open and place under sinks and in closets where dogs can't get to it. These too went untouched for days and weeks. My father bought a different brand of poison. This time, during the week or two we were gone, Uncle Tom found a pair of my father's boxer shorts and left it draped over one of the poison boxes. It's a true fact. After that, my father seemed to decide to live and let live. But eventually, a friend of his brought a wire live trap to the cabin, and next morning, Uncle Tom was in it. My father and his friends spent a long time deciding how to kill him. The mesh of the trap was too fine to shoot the .22 through, so they filled a washtub with water and together plunged the trap to the bottom and held it there, work gloves on their hands, their faces pale. I saw the rat dart and bump the cage in his frenzy, and then I didn't watch. Not only the first night, but 2 of the next 3 as well, the rat of my present life springs my trap and hauls off parts of its workings. I'm getting good practice at whittling sticks, but I'm getting no rat. And so, for lack of a more sensible idea, I pry off a piece of the kitchen wall paneling where his noises seem to be focused, and there's his nest, a 1.5-foot mound of shredded insulation, giving off a sweetly urinous scent. Things are in and around this hill of rat domesticity. Acorns, a wine cork, bits of foil and cardboard, 2 razor blades, a package of Stimudents, a ballpoint pen cap, one of mine, I'm positive, a nub of yellow pencil, and 2 of my whittled sticks. It's an odd feeling staring at his life heap, this between-walls home he has made, not in the cottage and not out. I haven't seen Stimudents since I was a kid. How many rats have added to this nest? I feel vaguely guilty, as if I violated a place I have no right to be. But no, it's the other way around. I find the hole in the subfloor where he comes and goes, has gone for now, and smugly nail a board over it. For a few nights, peace. Then the scuttle of rat again, closer this time, in the wall by the bedroom doorway, which has no door, and in the ceiling just outside. He bustles intermittently for hours with his fine nocturnal energy, scrabbling down into the wall and after a while scrabbling up and across the ceiling, pausing briefly to gnaw now and then as if suddenly remembering he should exercise his teeth. I'd rather be sleeping, but still, I hearken to him. He's on a roll, this rat. Sometimes I work that way myself, riding a nighttime wave from one piece of writing to another as each presents itself, finishing nothing but touching everything, everything fluid in the river of my mind. A few hard slaps on the ceiling quiet him. He makes whispery, scratching sounds, then nothing. Back in bed in semi-sleep, I try to imagine him, huddled silent in his own world, separated from ours by an 1/8 inch of wood veneer. What's in his mind? Is there anything? Some dim meditation on what it means, those sudden booming shakes from below? What's it like to live in such tight spaces, such perfect dark? I see him crouching, quiet, his muzzle faintly twitching, an aura of secret knowledge around him. Sometime after we've fallen asleep, he's rattling around again, so loud I think at first he's found a way inside, in the closet now, scratching underneath the bed. Occasionally he whaps his tail. It must be his tail, or maybe a foot, in a quick percussive drum roll. With earplugs and a fan going for white noise, we eventually get some sleep. I can still hear him, of course. His scratching and rattling and gnawing are piercing sounds, and after a while I'm listening for them, fixated, measuring the silences between his flurries. The next 2 nights are much the same, and I'm at a loss. I've tried the trap again, both under the cottage and on the roof, and now he just ignores it, much too busy for it, to judge from what we hear. I've plugged a few cracks and holes I found on the outside of the place to no avail. Or have I trapped him in the walls? Is he going to die in there, running maniacally to the end, and stink the cottage from his secret crypt? But the pattern of his noises, those bursts of activity with silence between, says he's coming and going unimpeded. Finally, one morning, I wake up with the decision already made. After teaching, I drive to the hardware store for poison. We would give him our walls, but we won't give him our sleep. To place the stuff where he's liable to find it, I have to take down one of the wood veneer ceiling panels. I work it carefully, trying to loosen the nails without splintering the veneer, and finally, as one edge drops loose in my hands, a shower of acorns rains on my head and clatters to the floor. So that's what he's been up to. Acorns have been dropping on the roof and all around the cottage for weeks. It's a good year, a bumper crop. Admiring their mahogany varnish, we've brought a few inside and placed them in a basket on the bookshelf. Now I've got 100 of them on my floor. Doing my part in one of the odder seed dispersal systems in all of natural history, I gather the acorns and heave them out the door. When I'm not actually lying awake in bed cussing him and jumping up to slap the ceiling, hoping not just to silence him but to give him a concussion, it's hard to hate this rat. He's gotten a lot of work done, and there's something very winning about his industry. His business so sensible, it turns out, and pursued with such innocent vigor. He's got a sense of humor, too. He keeps me in my place, but he does it with imagination and impishness. I leave the poison boxes in their bag and replace the ceiling panel. It wouldn't work anyway. This rat is not only crafty, he's well fed. New World rats and mice, it says in my Audubon guide, compose the largest family of mammals in North America. 19 genera, 70 species, nested in every habitat in the land. Not surprising. If the greater clan is as canny and ambitious as our cottage mate, it's bound to prosper. Based on where we are, it seems our rat is probably a dusky-footed wood rat, buff brown, belly washed with tan, white toes, omnivorous and nocturnal, like me. After mating, it says, the males live separately, so we likely have a husband on the lam until the kids clear out. That's hopeful. Maybe he'll leave before long. But what were all those acorns for? The trading habit, my book says, is common to wood rats. They'll drop what they were carrying to pick up something else, especially something bright. No one knows why, but I understand it. You can make something good that way, dropping what you started with when something better flashes. Collect enough flashes, sometimes you've got a poem. Our rodent in residence is collecting hard that night, restoring his stash. Now that we know what he's doing, the trail of his noises is clear. He drops down into the wall, then silence for a few minutes, sometimes half an hour. When he returns from acorn hunting, he climbs the wall and skitters quickly through the ceiling. Sometimes, there's nothing else it could be, he drops the acorn he's been carrying and bowls it, or maybe bats it soccer style, or noses it, somehow sends it rattling across the ceiling to its appointed place. And then he stops cold for 10 seconds, a minute, 3 minutes. I have the surest sense he's baiting us. He's doing it on purpose, just daring us to slide off into sleep. It's our house, I realize I'm thinking. This rat has the run of the entire hillside, thickets and grass and intertwining oaks where he could ramble forever. And here he is, clattering in and out some rat door I can't find like a happy speed freak, bowling acorns for his pleasure 10 feet from where we lie not sleeping in our own house. I'm tired and mad enough to rip the ceiling down, acorns, insulation, the whole damn thing, except I know it wouldn't help. He knows my house better than I do. He'd dodge ahead along his secret passageways, laughing as I tore the place to shambles. But how will we get rid of him? We joke about giving him the cottage and moving to a Palo Alto apartment. We joke, and after dinner the next evening, I go out back and set up the tent. When we turn in, we're comfortable there, under quilts on a thick foam pad, and it's wonderfully quiet. Just a hint of wind in the Monterey pine. Exile could be worse. Maybe tomorrow night we'll sleep out in the field, and the next night over by the big eucalyptus where the red-shouldered hawk likes to perch, and then still farther, ranging wilder and wilder up the Santa Cruz hills. And our rat, meanwhile, will gnaw out of the walls and roam the cottage, forgetting his acorns as he grows soft and paunchy on our leftovers and bread. Well, there's justice in it, says the rodent in my head. We don't own the cottage, after all. We didn't build it. We found it more or less by accident, as he did, and nested it with things just like him. And he didn't come from far away, either. He was born on this hill, of parents born here the same. But never mind his lineage, what about his generosity? He's perfectly content to share the place, asking only for the inside of the walls. Why are we so intolerant? Because it's our house, damn it. He may have a valid biotic claim, and he may have won the cottage for the night, but I have a bigger brain, and I'm not done yet. I like sleeping outdoors, but no rat is going to make me sleep outdoors. We're not just weekenders, we live here, and if I can find his secret door, he won't. It has to be under the bedroom wall. And so I spend the next morning prying off sheets of paneling and peering among studs and electric wires with a flashlight. There's a small opening through the subfloor next to the doorway, but it's more a crack than a hole. I can't believe a beast as loud as our friend could fit through that. So I go on dismantling to the end of the wall. The desiccated corpse of a mouse rests on a 2x4 ledge, but no hole. It has to be the crack by the door. I remember hearing, I think, they can supple themselves to pass through tight places. I nail down a plug and put the wall back together, taping instead of nailing the panel in front of the plugged hole. I don't know what's going to happen, but something is, whether I've blocked him in or blocked him out. I'm hoping out, but of course he's in. In bed, we hear him moving around the ceiling at half speed, probably just waking up. And when he drops down into the wall for his first journey out, I'm ready. I pull the taped panel just far enough from the framing to slip in a piece of 2x4 I've cut to fit tight between the two studs. I tape up the panel, and he's a trapped rat, plugged below and now above. He knows it, too, because he's very quiet the rest of the night. There's no time to deal with him in the morning, but I'm in no hurry. He's not going anywhere. My day passes in an aura of satisfied accomplishment. That evening, though, when Marilyn and I are home from work, I'm struck with doubt. This is the rat, after all, who has foiled and ridiculed my every attempt to catch him. And it's awfully quiet in that wall. I crack open the top of the taped panel and scan the bottom of the cell using a flashlight and a small mirror. He's there all right, nosed into a corner, but he looks unbelievably small, more of a mouse than a rat. A trick of the mirror, I suppose. After all that's happened, I'm glad we've caught him alive. He's been a worthy adversary. It will be a pleasure to release him many, many miles away, to assemble his new nest and get on with his life. The trouble is, though, we haven't really caught him. He's trapped in his cell of wall, but how do we get him out of there? A fishing net might do the trick if I had one, but I don't. Rummaging in a crowded closet, I find a small cardboard box, a little larger than rat size. The best idea I can come up with is to hold it upside down and lower it over him from above. Marilyn is doubtful, but it's time to act. It's time to get him gone. As things stand now, he's out of my reach, so I put on my work gloves and saw across the taped panel 3 feet above the floor. Then, as Marilyn stands behind me holding a sheet outstretched, our safety containment, I take off the top section and slowly lower the box. The rat looks a lot bigger and the box a lot punier as it gets closer to him, but now I'm committed. He squirms a little deeper into the corner. He's a caught rat, I'm thinking, when just as the box is about to cover him, he explodes up my arm, launches from my shoulder past Marilyn's face, and scuttles into the bedroom and under the bed. Marilyn is making guttural noises. I am standing quietly like the fool I am, who has not only failed to catch a cornered rat, but personally presented him a convenient pathway into our house. The bed, a pine platform on cinder blocks, has lots of things under it: suitcases, pillows, a box of photos, bags of this and that. He's buried somewhere in that nest clutter, probably feeling a lot safer than he did a minute ago. I get the wok cover from the kitchen, and with that in my left hand, hoping for another chance, I start removing what's there, tapping each item and gingerly dragging it out. He shoots out of the empty blue duffel just as I touch it. I clap down the cover too late. Of course I'm too late, and he's under the dresser in the corner of the room. Shining the flashlight along the wall, I can see him crouching, but I can't get to him. Marilyn and I look at each other. You'd better ask Wally for his pellet gun, I tell her. I stand in the doorway in case the rat decides to run, but he's not going anywhere. He's crowding himself into the corner, trying his best to disappear. Everything in him wants to go back to the comfortable, close-quartered darkness he knows. But he's trapped for good now. He's loose where he didn't want to be and where we can't allow him to stay. He's caught on the wrong side of our walls, too fast and too smart for us in our blundering ways to save him. Marilyn returns with Wally with the gun, and we arrange ourselves for the finish. Wally kneels in the doorway with my pry bar in his hand. Marilyn stands behind him with the sheet, but of course the rat stays put. He squirms as my first shot hits him in the side. I don't know if the second hits him at all. The third shot kills him. Walking into the field with his body in a plastic bag, though it's probably cleaner than I am, I tell myself it had to be done. I tried harder than most people would have to catch him alive. He was driving us crazy, and now at least we'll have our sleep back. It's all true, but I've never felt more thoroughly defeated. I think of all the times I've hiked the mountains or scrambled up desert canyons hoping for a glimpse, or if not a glimpse, just a track or scat, some briefest witness of a life not human or touched by humans. A creature as wild and intelligent and worthy as any in those far places comes to where we live, gets tangled in our sensibilities, and the best I can do is what Americans have always done. Necessarily, as any reasonable householder would, I trained my vision through the sights of a gun. But it's not just the rat. He had to go, and remorseful as I now feel, there have been many nights I would have gladly murdered him. The field is absolutely still tonight, no movement in the oaks or dry grasses. I can hear the whispered background surge of cars from I-280. Down the hill, something rustles. We still see animals here. A few deer who browse the grass when it's green and stay close to our watered oasis in the summer drought, and raccoons who are so adaptable they thrive in city alleys. Once in a while a coyote, the master survivor. But 30 and 40 years ago, Wally says, when his was the only house for half a mile, this place teemed with animals. He and Mary saw amazing things. A pair of gray foxes would groom themselves on the porch of his study, 6 feet from where he watched. Once a red-tail flew across the patio wrestling with a gopher snake, nearly crashing at their feet. Bulldozers carved the hills, new homes kept rising along new roads, the animals slipped away. We see remnants now. And when this field goes to houses, as it will before long, the remnants too will disappear. A jet rumbles over toward San Francisco Airport. The night sky is never still around here. A few stars are out, washed pale as they always are by the diffused radiance of the greater peninsula, ranging away to the north in a twinkling swath from where I stand. And closer, circling almost all around the field, the lights of neighboring homes shine steadily. Porch lights, street lights, security flood lamps, lit windows, a constellation of human residents, rooms where people eat and speak and have their lives, where children grow. We need those rooms. We need the walls we put around us. But dropping the pack rat in the field, I wish we knew some other way of building them. I wish we could live in our human house without sweeping it so clean of other lives. Well, that's that one. What did I do with those others? Here we go. Here's another piece from the desert essay. I used to hope for monumental discoveries in the desert. I hoped to gaze across a canyon at an untouched Anasazi city, as the Quaker cowboy Richard Wetherill did in 1888 when a few strays led him to Mesa Verde's Cliff Palace. I hoped to find the bones of Everett Ruiz, the young desert wanderer who disappeared in the Escalante country in 1934, leaving the cryptic inscription Nemo scratched on the canyon walls. I hoped at least to see a cougar, a desert bighorn, something rarer than a lizard or a mule deer. More than anything, I suppose, I hoped for a vision, a flash of knowing in whose light I would suddenly understand my life and death and all the hieroglyphic forms of nature. I've walked some desert miles now, and no revelation has thrown me off my feet. Vision, I'm beginning to think, is not a sudden kind of thing. Maybe it's a progress, a slow gathering of small seeings. Maybe it has to be. If my eyes can't comprehend an ant, why should they be gifted with the face of God? I would probably die of fright. Walking a canyon sometimes I'll stop, vowing to look so intensely at a particular thing, a purple flower, a sandstone spire, that its entire being will come clear to me. I stare, and soon my eyes grow weary. My mind grows wearier. The flower's language is untranslatable. I could stare until I felt bones at the bottom of that rock spire, and still its red and black stained surface would thwart me. It would stand in its peculiar form, unlike any other spire in the desert, in the galaxy, a monument to nothing but itself. And so I walk again. The canyon goes on, and ordinary wonders mark its way. A cactus and a dead juniper, a yellow gourd on a withered vine, an Anasazi man with arms uplifted. Ahead, a junco flashes its white-lined tail. A small black-collared dinosaur rests on a rock. The canyon keeps on winding, part shadow and part sun, revealing itself ahead as it closes up behind. You touch the part you see with your awareness, the only light you know, and enough. You're ready to be surprised. Step by step, you walk the winding canyon, and as good a place as any to end your walk is the alcove below an overhang you can't climb, to lie curled in that cool shade with the few ferns that live there, listening to a slow drip of water. The way you came, the way you will return, lies clear. And winding on above you is the canyon you will never climb, winding deep among the bluffs and spires, winding through distant ranges, through the sky, through the wilderness of scattered stars. Well, over where I live, in the coastal Cascade Northwest, the timber industry and the United States Forest Service have, for about 40 years, been embarked on an ambitious project. That project has been to convert the old growth Douglas fir forest of the public lands of the Cascade and Olympic ranges, outside of a few national parks and high elevation wilderness areas, into one intensively managed short rotation tree farm. Most people in industry and many in the Forest Service think the project has been a success. And in certain terms it has, in that about 85% of the original old-growth Douglas fir has been cut, and a lot of new trees are growing. Many others of us think the project is an awful failure, an economic failure because it's an unsustainable use of the forest, an ecological failure for reasons that come clearer every day, because it has injured watersheds, tainting drinking water and ruining fish runs, because it has driven certain species, not limited to the spotted owl, to the brink of population collapse, and because it has gutted and fragmented one of the most spectacular living communities on Earth. The tragedy of the present situation, as I see it, is that no one and no thing is winning. Not mill workers, whose jobs have been slipping away for well over 10 years, from long before any environmentalists ever filed a lawsuit. Not the timber towns where the mills are closing. Not environmentalists and recreational users of the forest, despite what you hear. Not the spotted owl and other forest-dependent species. Certainly not the forest, and certainly not the land itself, which in many cases will never raise again a forest like the one that flourished there as recently as 80 years ago. It seems to me, well, the only winners I see are the timber corporations, whose profits are still high, some of them higher than ever, and who, even as they make loud appeals on behalf of timber jobs and timber communities and the timber way of life, are busy closing their mills and pulling out of those towns because they've cut by far the most of the best of the old-growth bonanza they came for. I think most of all, the project is a failure of the human imagination. To encounter one of the most abundantly complex ecosystems on Earth, a forest more prolific, considerably more prolific acre for acre than even the tropical rainforests, and to see only one value in that forest, to cut it down as fast as you can and turn it into 2x4s and more tract homes, and replace it with cornrows of planted trees, seems to me an imaginative failure of the first order. Well, that wasn't a poem, that was an unpaid political announcement, but I do have a poem. I always read something, poetry or prose, on old-growth forest these days. Opal Creek is a place in the Central Oregon Cascades. It's a drainage that contains the largest remaining unlogged tract of old growth in Oregon. Forest Service has been trying to sell most of the timber there for 20 years. The friends of the place have been fighting them off for 20 years. The fate of the place is unknown. It's a good place to hike if you get over that way. I've hiked down there a few times and wrote this poem called Opal Creek. A narrow, twisting trail enters this forest of hemlock, red cedar, and Douglas fir, skirts the stream that flashes white below, switchbacks over steep ridges, and grows fainter as the tilted, mossy-barked trees grow huger, and fallen trunks lie everywhere, roots upthrust, their solid centuries drawn back to ground, ranks of seedlings rooted in the rotting wood. Grow and go down, the dark earth spiring to light and returning. The forest travels its changing way without the need of any trail to guide it. And neither do the varied thrush and winter wren need direction through the shadows where they sing, or the red-backed vole that burrows in the ground, or the stream spuming and swirling between pools. Only the people who walk here need this line that leads through stillness and the muted light, through ferns and thimbleberries sopping our pants, through the blended dark smells of mossy ground, through scatters of mushrooms, yellow and crimson, flaring orange, and others half black, half white. And even we can change. Even men and women can gradually learn to let go of the trail as it fades among the trees and underbrush and leaves us where nothing human shows the way. There are other ways. We can lower ourselves on vine maple holds down a moss-slick bank, thrash through a tangle of devil's club and briars, climb from the thicket on a down Douglas fir and walk that trunk to another, and at last to one great fallen tree, thicker through than we are tall. We can climb its furrowed bark, and there we can sit, our hard breath easing as we listen to a bird hidden high above. Like the spiring trees and the lives they hold, we rest ourselves on death's generous body, and all around us where the stillness sings, we see the green abundance of death's rising. We came for this, for the rhythm longer than our lives can know, and when we climb down to find the trail and walk out of the forest, we take with us what surrounds us in this place as we leave it here, leave it where we turn around, where mushrooms, moss, and red-backed vole, where thimbleberry and dripping ferns, where thrush and wren and the unseen birds, where swirling stream and muted light, where stillness and the ancient trees go on. I have a short, little murderous metaphysical poem here. This goes back to the landscape of the Eastern Oregon ranch where I live. Comes out of a walk I took. I just wrote the poem recently, but it comes out of a walk I took 10 years ago with a young friend who was then a fourth grader and now is a pretty good pole vaulter for the University of Oregon. The kid who asked too many questions. All our walk long, the boy had wondered why some rocks were big and some not so big, why the redtail cried so hoarse, why juniper berries were just that blue. So by and by I grumbled up a thunderstorm, and lightning split him eye for eye. His halves settled, two gray stones staring into ground with no tongues to ask what happened. Between them, where all that wanting to know had seethed behind the boy's eyes, the yellow balsam root blooms in May, and lizards wait for a question to the answer beneath their feet. Marilyn wanted to come on this trip but couldn't, so I want to read one poem to her. It's written 2 years ago. The title tells all. For our 5th anniversary, 7 days late. We count these years, but it's a different kind of counting. Not milestones, which only mark how far we've come, and not like birthdays, not collecting numbered years. The years themselves count less than what they slowly purl around us, around our pleasures and our irritations, the gradual surprise of this shared life, this mingling that we wear. We count on that. And though I know that no arithmetic can make us more than we are, I also know 5 years and 7 days are not our sum, and whatever else I am, I know I'm here, a happy man tapping my foot to music, counting the time in my forgetful way to this singular song we learn day by day. I have a poem especially for any teachers and students who might be here. Do we have any of those kind of people here? Right. All right. Yeah, well, this is especially for the teachers and students. The rest of you can listen too. This is a spring quarter poem. Stanford's on a quarter system. The weather's often nice down there, but in May it gets really nice, and nobody cares too much about learning, teachers or students, and nobody really wants to be in class. Everybody knows it's the wrong place to be. And so that's the setting. Let's see, what else do you need to know? Well, I had a little office there I shared with a friend named Kent, a fiction writer, a good one too. And it was a ground floor office, we had a big window we kept open in nice weather. And a scrub jay started frequenting our window after corn chips and whatever debris might be around. So this poem is titled, "To the Scrub Jay on My Office Mate's Desk." As if you know what you're doing, you flick through the window and here you are, brighter blue than I've ever seen you in sun, at ease and cocking your head, as if born for the company of Kent's papers and cups. I'll be late for class, Stout Bill, but I have to know why you flew into this fluorescent cave from the air of a fine spring day, and what's on your mind as you hop past the stapler, and how I can keep you from the half-open door just a wing lift away. Don't do it, Bird. Already I can see you lost in the hallways, slapping ceiling tiles, glancing off dim-painted walls, careening into class with your croaking panic and dodging the startled faces, flapping and clawing, grazing the blackboard, finally thrashing your chalk-smeared feathers against the window, crazy for the blue afternoon. But you have better sense. With a flex of your legs and a brush of air on my cheek, you leave as you came. You're out where you should be, and I'm left with a half-open door. This poem's called Passage. To listen to the river's slurring whisper, the licks and gurgles along its banks, is to hear the soundlessness of snow come down in all its multitudes on heights of rock. It is to hear that stillness, weighted down with time and quickening beneath the tongues of glaciers, milky glistenings and streamings over stone, trickling now, splashing down, gathering themselves in gravity's bright surging song, boulder music pounding on with sprays of spume and swirling pools, and settling through distances to slide past here subdued and lively, filled with a dreamer's speechful stirring, lost in its old story that never ends. And here's a snow camping poem since it's in season. In Sky Lake's wilderness. Winter tells the old stories. The lakes are shut like eyelids. Earning heat to pay the wind, we thread our skis between dark firs, pitch camp as the gray light leaves. Our fire throws wild shadows against the circling forest wall, while beyond that room where we drink whiskey, laughing, the cold stars glint, the wind touches every tree. Later, inside our tent, we feel the air fall still, a heaviness, and soon the ticking of fine snow. Drifting in and out of sleep, we hear the silent storm begin to bury us, to mound us under like the bowed young firs. Our fire hisses faintly as snow cools and covers it. Nothing then, except the creak of limbs taking on the slow, familiar weight and the small whistling flurries of the wind. Anything we are makes no difference in this place, where trees, wind, and falling snow work their ways together in the stillness they have always known. What strange joy to huddle here, buried in our single warmth, listening to what lives outside our lives. I'm going to read one more poem and then one concluding piece of the desert essay. This poem's not in season, but I like it, so I'm going to read it anyway. It's called Dependence Day. It would be a quieter holiday. No fireworks or loud parades. No speeches, no salutes to any flag. A day of staying home instead of crowding away. A day we celebrate nothing gained in war, but what we're given. How the sun's warmth is democratic, touching everyone, and the rain is democratic too. How the strongest branches in the wind give themselves as they resist, and give themselves. How birds could have no freedom without the planet's weight to wing against. How Earth itself could come to be only when a whirling cloud of dust pledged allegiance as a world, circling dependently around a star, and the star blossomed into fire from the ash of other stars, and once, at the dark zero of our time, a blaze of revolutionary light exploded out of nowhere, out of nothing, because nothing needed the light, as the brilliance of the light itself needs nothing. Now, at the risk of spacing out entirely, I will bring this reading back to earth and to a conclusion with my thanks to all of you for coming and listening. This will be the final section of the desert essay when all its sections are assembled, which will be a while. In these canyons, the cottonwoods tell stories, and the one I love the best they tell in fall, when they turn bright yellow, each in its solitude, against the red rock walls. It's the same story sunset tells, the story I need again and again, the glad and fearful story I'm beginning to understand. Sunset tells it grander. You can see how vast and old the story is, how other stories all make part of it, all end in that rich light. But you can't touch the sunset. You can't stand next to it or lean your back against it. With their trunks and limbs, their leaves that stir in the least of winds, the cottonwoods bring the story from the sky and place it here, close to us, in ground. I have seen the graceful ones, growing in a few gentle curves of trunk. I have seen those with 2 trunks, or 3, or 4. I have seen the bowed and twisted trees, trees that wander along the ground like blind beggars, trees that dive down into sand and turn upward again. I have seen a tree that circles upon itself in a corkscrew loop, and I have seen one ancient tree nearly 4 feet through, growing sideways out of a silt shelf and arching back on top of the shelf to bury its broken crown at the bottom of the canyon wall. Its gray bark is crumbling, exposing the cracked and riddled wood, and for part of its length the tree is split wide open, filled with stones and dead leaves caught from the crushing floods, and it still sends up along its racked body a few living limbs, small trees themselves, flagged with clean bright leaves. If we didn't hide our histories inside us, we could see our own lives as we see the trees. We could see how some rise true and easily, how some are bent or split from their beginnings. We could see where we were chafed and broken, where love failed or never was, where love returned. How we bore the weight of all that beset us, twisting, bending away and bending back. How we've grown as we've been able to grow and never have stopped growing, branching from the single source. How in the heaviness of our bodies we touch the air and tremble. How each of us, in one peculiar, unlikely way, rises in the light. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I ran a little longer than an hour.